Welcome back to Archaeology After Dark, everyone. I am, of course, your freshly showered host, Daniel Rhodes, and my guest today is Stephanie Rice Fuller. Stephanie, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I recently, last spring, graduated with my BA in Egyptology from UCLA in Southern California. And I will be going to grad school in Edinburgh at the University of Edinburgh for my master's in archaeology with like an Egyptology focus. And yeah, and I'm a mother of three, and so that's also fun to juggle with archaeology and a day job and mom life.
Yeah, that's something a lot of people, they have to juggle archaeology, which is a constantly travel dependent field. And you can't exactly take kids with you in the field. I know people who do, but they're, older kids, like third and fourth graders who are self-sufficient enough to where you don't have to watch them like a hawk, but you can't just take a toddler with you out in the field because that's
Yeah.
dangerous, and some people would say irresponsible, but I'm not necessarily one of those people. I could just strap a toddler to my chest and start digging a hole.
Yeah. I think it definitely depends on the context, and like the situation. Obviously, there's going to be more dangerous digs where I would definitely say no toddler, but um, the dig that I go on in Scotland, it's very like mellow in like it's very close to Stirling in the city. So it's very much like, yeah, a toddler could probably come visit and then like hang out for a bit of the day, and then you still have plenty of time to do tourism stuff around the town. But I
Yeah,
definitely
that's
would not take a toddler to the dig I'm at in Egypt.
no. Scotland, I could see as being, an easy project just because of how easy the climate is there. It's not like extreme in one way or another. Like it's not freezing cold or it's not like blazing hot. It's like moderate.
Yeah, exactly. Like the worst thing to deal with is the rain, but as long as you have the right gear, that's really fine.
So, what were you working on in Scotland?
It started off as a Roman site. There were some roundhouses there that the council archaeologist for Stirling had discovered through I think they were found when they were digging a new footpath for the like trails around the golf course. Kings Park used to be like the hunting park for Stirling Castle when monarchies still lived there, but now it's become a golf course and like a little there's like a playscape and like it's just a public park now basically. So they were digging a new footpath and they found the Roman roundhouses, and then as the excavations were going on, some like older sites were found, and then Dr. Murray Cook, our fearless leader, he started doing some more digging from the area, and noticed that there was an interesting spot that he wanted to check out. And so last season we actually found a Neolithic burial cairn. So that's really exciting.
So, a cairn isn't something we actually have on this continent, or we don't have very often. What exactly is that?
It's sort of similar to mounds, except instead of like dirt generally, it uses stones from the area, large stones. This one specifically is a curb cairn, so large stones are placed in just a big circle around where the cairn itself is, and then it is sort of built up a little bit more like a mound in the center. There will be multiple cremation burials usually. Then they're put in urns, and then multiple generations will be placed in this same cairn.
So, what can we learn as archaeologists from studying something like that?
The biggest thing is we can learn more about the Neolithic past, especially in Scotland, where it's not as widely studied. A lot more of UK archaeology in general has like a lot of Roman, medieval archaeology, and then uh, through trying to learn more about these cairns, we've figured out that there's not really a lot of research done on Neolithic Scotland, which because there's rarely there actually are bodies found within these cairns. So there was one recently that instead of being cremated, one person was actually interred like a regular burial that we would have nowadays. And so they were able to actually DNA sequence him and start to do facial reconstruction. And they, for anyone interested, it's Torbrek's is where it was located. And it's very interesting to actually see the past like that. Like you can actually see the facial reconstruction of what someone who lived 4,000 years ago looked like. And that connects a lot of people more with their direct history, especially in Scotland, where it is very interesting actually being in a place where people are still living where their core history is tied to, as opposed to working in North America, where European settlers have come. And so the majority of archaeology here that is past the historic period is going to be on Native American sites. So there's not quite that same personal connection there to the people who are doing the digging mostly.
Yeah, and that's, one of the things we strive to do as archaeologists is make a connection between who was and who are. I probably could phrase that a little differently because if any English teacher I had in the past saw that, they'd probably send me an email saying, please don't phrase it like that ever again. But that's exactly what we try to do as archaeologists is connect with who we used to be and who we are now. And putting a community together with somebody who used to live there is what we strive to do. It's not every day, but it's on an almost daily basis.
Yeah, yeah. And I especially love that aspect of archaeology in general. I love more of like the everyday life, the connection to people that are like just like us basically, as opposed to like studying elite, because I think that does help people kind of connect more with that past too, because I mean, we see ourselves a little bit more in that, like far more than we see ourselves in like the pharaohs in Egypt.
Yeah, that's a point I brought up in several episodes is just because somebody isn't, you know, famous or wealthy or something like that doesn't mean they're any less important to history because they're still playing a part. It's not, shown in the light as much as somebody who's, like a pharaoh or a king, but it's still important because they served a purpose in history also.
Exactly. Yeah. And ultimately, without them, realistically, there wouldn't be anyone to prop up any sort of kings or leaders. So they're kind of the core component.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have a pharaoh without people worshiping them. I probably, yeah, that's one of those things that I should probably rephrase, but that's that's the idea.
Yeah. I mean, that's the best way to like really concisely sum it up.
I mean, you can't rule people if there are no people to rule. There we go.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've done Scotland also, but you just got back from Egypt recently, right? That's what
Yes.
within the past month or so.
Yeah. Exactly a month ago today.
Welcome back to this continent.
Thank you. It's been a little difficult to readjust. I was there for a month, so
So I imagine that was tough being, away from your family on a different continent for a month.
it was, yeah, especially because of the 10-hour difference. Just it was hard being able to connect to actually like FaceTime with anyone. So because there was very little overlap where we were both awake and not busy. So that was a bit hard. I was constantly asking for pictures of my kids and bothering my teen constantly.
But that's one of those things that makes archaeology now easier is that we can actually communicate with people in the field to like a stationary location. If people were trying to do that in Egypt, like the original excavations in Egypt, it'd be like 2 or 3 weeks before they got a reply, and then World War II starts.
Yeah, exactly. At the site that I was at, actually, it's very, very remote. Like 2 hours. It's a 2-hour drive with like a driver who's going pretty fast from the closest airport, and it's a very small regional airport for like resorts along the Red Sea coast. So it's like 2 hours south of Marsalam, and then from what I understand, for the past like so the excavation started 30 years ago. And so for the first 20 years of that, 20 to 25 years of that, they were just remote. There was no real way to communicate with anyone other than like going closer to the resort towns and trying to get connection there. And when I was there though, we had enough signal for Wi-Fi. We were like we had plenty of power to use like multiple laptops. Basically everyone was able to just like constantly charge whatever electronics they needed. There were several times where I just stopped and I had to stop and take a step back and just say like technology is really amazing. Like there's no way that even 30 years ago archaeologists could have been this connected with everyone.
Yeah, I keep, getting stories from people who I've had as professors, and they're like, yeah, we used to spend like all day in the library's card catalog. And I was like, no, I don't have to do that. I have Google now.
Exactly, like Google Scholar and JSTOR, and then like with various university accesses, like I don't even need to leave the comfort of my home for most of my research.
Yeah. And so I just finished grad school last year, and I was able to do a lot of it online. I didn't even have to go to campus unless I physically had to. And that is wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to be doing my master's for Edinburgh mostly online. Just again because of like having toddlers, it's going to be very difficult to like uproot them and then move to the UK with them. So like the fact that I can do a master's from the UK remotely from California is amazing.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. How are you going to move a family from California to Scotland? But now I've heard that you're not having to do that, which is great.
Yeah. It would be nice if like long term we could end up doing that. There's actually a special visa scheme that the UK introduced relatively recently that graduates of the top 50 universities around the world actually get like a pretty good visa if you apply for it, and UCLA is one of those schools. So we might end up using that to just move there because it's closer to Egypt. Honestly, like it just would be so much easier to take a 5 to 6 hour flight instead of having to spend 16 plus hours commuting across the world from California. So hopefully we'll see.
I mean, no one can say that archaeologists aren't dedicated people that we're, willing to travel across the world just to learn or look at something.
Exactly. Yeah. It was very interesting on my flight back. Like my like seat neighbor started asking me about why I was in Egypt and what I was doing. And I was like, well, I was there to study baskets. And she was like, you traveled around the world for baskets. And I was like, well, when you put it that way, it sounds silly.
Yeah, when you put it like that, that makes us sound crazy. But
Yeah.
I mean, I've met people who have traveled, different continents to look at ceramic fragments that are this big. They're really interesting fragments, but when you boil it down, it's still a fingernail sized ceramic.
Exactly. Yeah.
But again, we're a dedicated bunch of people, and
We definitely are.
the world is really pretty when you go and see it.
Yes, every time I didn't get my passport until I was much older. So my first trip to Scotland 2 years ago was actually my very first international trip, and it was so amazing. It was just like mind blowing. And now, of course, I've caught the bug, and then I got the chance to go to Egypt. And now I go back to Scotland every year, and so now I'm just like planning other countries I have to go to. I love seeing everything else. Not in a bad way. Like I obviously love living here too, and I've traveled all over the US too, but it's just completely new experiences.
Yeah, it's completely different from say just driving between state to state than actually like leaving the continental United States and going somewhere else.
Exactly.
Like you don't have to have a passport to drive from California to Nevada.
Exactly. Yeah. Though it's still mind blowing to me every time I remember that the distance from Los Angeles to Las Vegas is the same as the distance from London to Paris.
Okay, I didn't know that, and that actually is mind blowing.
Yeah, because we're getting a bullet train that's going to go between Los Angeles and Vegas. And I was like, well, that seems like a silly route. Like in Europe, they have like you can go between London and Paris. And then I looked it up and I was like, oh, that's the same distance. We are giant.
Yeah, and I've gone the train from London to Paris and it goes under the English Channel. You can't actually see the English Channel, so it's a little disappointing. But other than that, it's a lot of fun to go under the English Channel.
Yeah, I think that would be cool. I haven't had a chance to yet, but I would love to. I was supposed to go to Paris, my first trip to Scotland. I had some extra time afterwards. But then I happened to be there at the same time as the UK train strikes. So there was literally no way out of Scotland because also like the taxi drivers were striking in solidarity and the few Uber drivers that were still working were just like completely swamped. And so I was like, well, I don't want to like put more strain on that, and I support the strike, so I'll just stay in Scotland and go up to the Highlands.
Yeah, that's one of the, I guess, the tough things now about planning a trip, especially as a student, that you have to like really study the area that you're going into, like not what you're wanting to study while you're there, but everything that goes along with it, like the politics and everything. Like you don't want to like plan an entire trip to like say Egypt and then for some reason or another not be able to actually see what you're going to look at because, well, one, you're a tourist, or two, you're a scientist, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I had gone to Egypt trying to like rent my own car and get around, there would have been no way. Like like only locals can get through. There's like special permits, there's checkpoints that you have to go through. But like if I had just gone in blindly, like I would have like flying into another state or even flying into the UK, that would have been a mistake. And I would have wasted tons of money that most students don't have.
Yes, being a student, for those of you who don't know this, is expensive.
Yes, very. That's why I have to have a day job.
Yeah, it's something we all have to do is we want to go to school to get the job, but to get the job through the school, we have to have a job to do that. So
Exactly. So more proof of the dedication considering how ragged we run ourselves just to make it through to get the archaeology jobs.
yeah, I constantly look at myself in the mirror just to make sure I don't have horrendous dark circles under my eyes.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and you know, I hate going to like give a presentation and have like raccoon eyes in front of.
Exactly. Yeah. And then especially if you have to do it over Zoom and then you're extra conscious of like the light is never flattering. So
No, I have the light above me on because if I turn it off, this is like horrendously red. Like it's like Darth Vader's lightsaber red.
that's hilarious. It's really cool though. I do love it.
Yeah, my sister has a neon guy.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. So you went to Egypt. You were there for a month. What did you actually discover while you were there? Or I don't want to say discover because that makes it sound like you're like on a European survey and that's
Yeah, so so as a specialist, I'm not even really involved directly in the excavations. So I'm really just looking at the stuff that's already been excavated by others. So that's also like a little bit of an added layer to it. So that's why I don't even think of it as discover either. It's more so I'm just like identifying materials ultimately, like the main point of what I'm there to do is document as much as possible about the basketry, cordage, and matting that's been found, from like every little detail down to how each strand, like the materials for each type of strand, looking into cordage, like trying to get it down to like exactly how that cord was spun, things like that. So it's it feels more just like identifying to me.
yeah, that's something that I don't think a lot of people think about in archaeology is we're not always going out and digging something up. A lot of times we're just looking at something that somebody already found that they couldn't identify then, or we're wanting to return to its rightful owners because that's social justice and that's the way we do things now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And especially I can't remember who said it, but somebody once told me that the majority of archaeology is actually in the lab, in this modern age, compared to the old adage that the majority of archaeology is in the library. And I definitely would agree to that.
Well, I think that students, when they go to the library and try to find books on archaeology, they're going to find that their library doesn't have them and they have to cross order them from someone else's library.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially now that there's been this wave of shutting down like anthropology and archaeology libraries and whole departments in some cases. So it's getting harder and harder to find those.
Yeah, and even when you do find it, it's like not even what you're actually looking for. You need like the one sentence out of it, and you don't really need the rest of it.
Exactly. So then it becomes like this long, long chain for just one sentence that you were just hoping you could find.
Yeah, I spent 3 weeks trying to find like a journal article from the 70s, and I just needed like one little paragraph out of it. And I spent 3 weeks looking through journals looking for that one paragraph.
That is rough. Does
Mm,
that paragraph still haunt you?
a little bit. But then again, I've graduated, so everything I did haunts me.
That's fair. Yeah.
It's one of those things that again comes along with archaeology. It sticks with you how rough it was to actually get through it. It's rewarding, but again, it sticks with you.
Yes, definitely.
It's still a little hot.
Oh, careful.
So, what advice would you give to students who are traveling abroad, studying abroad for the first time, other than making sure they have a valid passport and aren't detained by customs?
Yeah, that is definitely important. But I would say first, know your limits. One of the biggest things I've learned just for myself and then also like going out into the field with others, some people don't actually have the physical experience of what their bodies can take before they end up going into the field. And that just knowing what your limits are so much better than just trying to like push through and power through. Like I've never been on an excavation or around any sort of archaeological like work where it wasn't okay to just say like I need to take a break. And so knowing what your limits are is definitely my number one. And then my number two kind of plays into that. Like if you know what your comfort is, like what you need to be comfortable, lean into it. Like just take it with you. I've seen people who do take stuffed animals with them everywhere, even though they are grown adults with PhDs, because it is something comforting from home. I've seen people like one of my first professors actually gave me like one of the best pieces of advice that has helped me through all of my excavations so far, and it's to bring a small treat from home that like you just absolutely love. It doesn't matter like if you think it's like blowing any diet or anything like that, just something like a small piece of candy. What I ended up taking was Scotland's shortbread because I just fell in love with it when I was in Scotland. So when I went to Egypt, I took Scottish shortbread with me, and that was whenever I was starting to feel like a little bit down or homesick because I couldn't talk to my family, I just had a little bite of shortbread. And honestly, as weird as it sounds, that cheered me up. Um, and that honestly just that's one of my next biggest pieces of advice. And then my third piece of advice is to bring way more like power supply packs than you think you're going to need, because it's better to have more energy than less and then have all of your equipment die in the field.
Yeah, I can imagine somebody being like mid paragraph on their research notes and then poof, it just shuts down. Or it's
Yeah.
like critical low battery warning. You should charge this. And you're like, oh, I can't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And one of the things that I also learned, which plays into doing research of the area you're going to, is don't try to take like solar charged battery packs to a place like Scotland, because it's not going to do you any good considering how cloudy Scotland is all the time. But they were amazing for me in Egypt, obviously, but they did nothing for me in Scotland. But luckily we were in the city, so I could plug everything in as I needed to. But that would have been brutal if we were more remote.
Yeah, that's the thing. if you're planning on going on an excavation, it doesn't even have to be outside of the continent. Make sure that you know the area that you're going to be in. If you're going to be in like a remote area, make sure you plan accordingly. Like you don't want to be stranded somewhere with either a dead cell phone, no actual like food supplies, or God forbid you lose one of your teammates.
Yeah, yeah, and definitely like proper gear because you need to know the weather and the terrain so you can know how to dress. Otherwise, like you don't want to end up like in the highlands, even in the summertime without a jacket. Because when I was at Loch Ness, it was August, and everywhere else I've ever been in August, it's hot. But I was cold enough to actually need sweaters and jackets. And if I hadn't have prepared, that would have also sucked.
Okay, so I have to ask this. You went to Loch Ness. Did you bring $3.50 with you?
I technically yes, but it was in pounds by that point. I did bring tree fitty.
I was hoping you would get that, and I was just gambling that you would get that, and I was going to be really sad if you.
I am chronically online, so
Oh, I'm going to laugh about that for a good day or two now.
same probably. I've never had anyone actually like bring that up or like with all of the amount of times I have talked about going to Loch Ness.
Well, I mean, people, you talk about Loch Ness or something like that, and they want to know, did you see the monster? They don't want to talk about the pop culture references that go along with it. Although I guess technically the Loch Ness monster is a pop culture reference too.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, at this point, it's just all in our pop culture and just started off as a prank. So,
Yeah, I mean it's out there now, and people are going to keep searching for it until they just get tired of looking for it, or I'm not sure if it's worse if they actually find it.
that's true. Yeah. Honestly, for the sake of Nessie, I hope they never find her because I would not want to see her end up in a lab, you know?
A lab, a zoo, or an aquarium, just leave the Loch Ness monster where it is. It's better for everybody. I mean, we've all seen the movies where they remove the giant monster from the wilderness and put it in a lab. It never turns out well for anybody.
Exactly. No.
Well, Stephanie, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
All right, that is going to do it for us here at Archaeology Today, or After Dark, everybody today. Sorry. Have a good day, everybody.